All right, I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Ruchakudash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Walk Through History, Life in the Mediterranean Region. Now, this idea for this lesson came once again from the book that I've been reading called New Testament and Antiquity. And they have a lot of good little nuggets and, little things, you can glean off, from the book to, for ideas for lessons. And I've been like reading through this book, and one thing that pretty much keeps, popping up is understanding the history of what was going on in those times to really get a better focus, on what the New Testament is saying. Because this was around that time of the Lord, around the time of the Lord, it was way different than it is now. So you have to be able to have the mindset of back then to the best of your ability when you're reading these scriptures in order to be able to get a better understanding of what the scriptures are talking about. And with the mindset of today, you're not going to get that, because the mindset of today is geared towards that Renaissance Christianity that Esau pushed out there once, he was let loose out of that prison sentence that he was in for 1,000 years. And no, he will not, when the kingdom is established, he will not break away and then put us back into captivity. That's a lie, hearsay. And that's that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read a little bit of this, and then I had a couple of precepts that came to mind, and I got one article that I want to read like a paragraph off of. I didn't read through the whole article. I just read through some of it. They go off, but there's some good meat in there, which we're going to glean off of it. So I'm in chapter 4, which starts on page 79, and it's called The Mediterranean World of the Apostle Paul. All right? So it says perspective. It says Paul arrived in the city of Corinth around the middle of the 1st century AD. Having traversed the Roman road system from Antioch in Syria all the way to Troas on the western coast of Asia Minor. And you had the Roman roads were called the Appian Way, where they set up, a road, like a highway system in the ancient world, because highways are nothing new. That's how the Romans would be able to travel and bring all of their, war, vehicles and stuff everywhere by those roads that they actually built. So the Apostle Paul was, like it says, traversing those roads, to get to these different regions, right? It says he and his companions crossed the Aegean Sea to Neapolis, the port of Philippi, and then walked through the eastern cities of Macedonia. After preaching in Berea, they again paid passage on a ship to Athens. From there, it was a short overland trip to Corinth. The roads they walked were paved and filled with pedestrians, horses, mules, and carts. And so you have to put your mind in that scenario. Picture yourself like, out in Cali, they call it a swap meet. Back east, they call it a flea market. Picture yourself being in a flea market or a swap meet, with all different types of people there selling food, selling goods, selling perfume, cologne, household detergents or whatever the case may be. And then in the midst of all of that, you're having debates about the election, who's going to be the next senator or whatever the case may be. Then you have, the philosophers, speaking of different theories and things that they're dealing with amongst themselves, preaching it to the public, different individuals coming up with different ideas. So this is how it was back then. You had court that was, criminals were tried in the out there in the open, So you have to picture that going on now. It's not like, I mean, you had synagogues and things of that nature, but the public debates, or the debates, were held publicly, in the midst of all this buying and selling and stuff like that. So you have to be able to put your mind in that scenario to be able to understand what the Apostle Paul was dealing with. It says, throughout the journey, Paul spoke Greek and, as a Roman citizen, could converse in Latin as well. When the scriptures don't really say that, but it makes sense because the three predominant languages back then was Hebrew, not Aramaic. Hebrew, which Aramaic was spoken by, by the higher ups. So you had Hebrew, you had Latin, and you had Greek. But it doesn't say that Paul ever spoke Latin, but it would make sense that he did, but we don't have any proof of that, So that would be a conjecture, which we can't go by conjectures. It says he also encountered people whose language he did not know. While the vast region he and his associates traveled was under Roman rule, the Macedonians of Berea had a distinct cultural heritage from the Greeks in Athens. And you have to understand that. And this is why he will go to different regions and speak about different things, because other regions weren't keeping those customs, So when he went to Corinth, he would say certain things to them based off of their belief system. Then he may go to Berea, or he may go to Antioch, or any other different places he went to, and he would have to know the history and the culture of that region in order to be able to best expound to them, the best approach to teach them the gospel, right? It says, and the Galatians' history was markedly different different than that of the inhabitants of the Antioch in Syria. Romans from Italy could be found in many cities, and Corinth itself was a Roman colony on Greek soil. Paul undoubtedly heard the sounds of the flute during worship in the temples, right? Because that's how they would do. They would worship their gods and they would play music. There would be different things. This is why the Apostle Paul, when he was speaking or sending letters to these different churches, he was addressing certain issues with them, that they shouldn't do this and that they shouldn't do that. Like it says in I believe that's 1 Corinthians 10. Let's go there real quick. And this will give you a better perspective and a better understanding to why the Apostle Paul used certain words and certain phrases, right? 1 Corinthians 1:19. What say I then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils. And that's why he would say that, because when on his travels, he encountered many of these different customs, many of these different things, which he was able to incorporate into his teachings when he was teaching these different Israelite foreigners in these different regions about Yahushua. It says, and not to the Most High. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. In other words, you can't mix the two. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. See? Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? And the answer to that is no. So having the understanding of what was going on at that time, you would understand this even more, because he's passing by temples. He's looking at these different daily sacrifices that they're doing for the heathen gods, the music and the processions and all of the things that they were doing. And he was able to use that to his advantage in teaching, to let them know that it was wrong and the reason why it was wrong, and then come back and hit them with the scriptures, and with the gospel, to be able to enlighten them as to why those things were wrong. So it says, Paul undoubtedly heard the sounds of the flute during worship in the temples, smelled the meat in the market next to the temple of Apollo, saw orators in the central forum making a good show before the crowds, who praised them and witnessed the dozens of clients who followed a rich man as he strode toward the public basilica. This was the Gentile world where Paul, the Jew from Tarsus, proclaimed the gospel. Paul took up the issues and debates of his day and constantly pointed men and women to the new thing that the Most High was doing through a crucified and resurrected Jew called Yahushua. So like I said, you have to put your mind back in this. Back then, you have to put your mind as to what was going on. Why is the reason that certain phrases or certain things were said by the apostles, by the apostle Paul, by Timothy, by, Titus and all of the different men that were out there teaching, Barnabas, so on and so forth. He engaged the current thinking on the nature of the gods, the world, and the values by which people should live. And this is dealing with the Israelite foreigners. As an orator in the forum, he proclaimed publicly that only Yahushua, not the emperor or any of the gods, was the Savior and Lord. So you have to remember, here it is, all these Israelite foreigners knew was the form of worship that they were used to, whether it was Zeus or Jupiter, whatever the case may be. And here it is, the Apostle Paul is telling them something contrary to what they know. So to the majority of them, they're going to be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? The scriptures call him a babbler or something like that. What's this babbler going to say? Because they didn't understand what the Apostle Paul was saying. It says, the apostle heralded the message of salvation, which offered hope in the midst of the anxious insecurities of life. His words spoke powerfully and pointedly to the people of the Mediterranean, right? So what I have first here, let's read a little bit of this article, and then I got a couple of precepts, to back that up, to show you why it would be foolish for them. So this is called the Mediterranean Sea, Cradle of Civilization. I took a still of this and put it in the beginning. It's a United Nations website. And then when we go down to the second paragraph, the subheading says the history of intellectual development in the Mediterranean basin. And this is what you have to understand about those times. So it says, established in 300 BC, the ancient library of Alexandria in Egypt was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. The first intellectual development emerged in the Eastern Mediterranean and focused mainly on philosophy. And that's the main thing, philosophy. The word philosophy, philo is love, and Safi is where you get the word Sophia, which is wisdom, lover of wisdom. And you had many different individuals back then that were philosophers. And they would give their theories and talk about certain things and, the woes of the day and just whatever it was that they were speaking about, the economy, and whatever the case was. It says people around the Mediterranean Sea have had limitless opportunities to meet different cultures and to learn about the world, and this fact, starting from the Hellenistic period, gave birth to the emergence of philosophers and scientists who made great contributions to intellectual development. Right, and that's the thing. This is why the Apostle Paul said, let's go real quick. Let's go to 1 Timothy. Because you had a lot of knowledge back there. That's why it says, all things are lawful, but all things edify not. So you did have things that could benefit a person if they knew about it, but it had no benefit when it came down to salvation. If you knew it, you knew it. If you didn't, no big deal. 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. Why? Because these pseudosciences were opposed to salvation, to the gospel, to the things that the Apostle Paul was speaking to these Israelite foreigners. So he was saying to them, pretty much, you got to put that out of your mind, these pseudosciences, because that's not going to get you the kingdom of heaven, So going back, it says, among them were Thales from Miletus, Anaximandros, Anaximenes, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, and Diogenes from Apollo, Hippocrates, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, 6th, 5th, and 4th century BC. All right, so that's the main thing we want. So you have to put yourself in the mind state of what was going on at that time to understand why the apostles and the rest of the men of the Lord were saying the things that they were saying. Like, for instance, when the apostle Paul said there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek. Why? Because they were both Israelites. It's just that one was brought up in Israel and the other one was brought up far away under the Hellenistic rule or under the Roman Empire. And they all had different customs depending on what region you were living in. Remember the apostle Paul had a battle with these individuals about Diana, because they were devoted to Diana, because that goes back to the woman worship, which when you really look at it spiritually, that goes all the way back, in time to where the leaders of the time during the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the leaders of Israel at the time were secretly doing those things. Like when you read Ezekiel the 8th chapter. All right, so the apostle Paul was warning them of these things because they still had leaders in that time of the apostle Paul that were doing the same exact things, but the only thing is that they didn't know that they were Israelites, but they were doing the same exact things that they were doing in the past. So let's go from there. Let's go to the book of Acts 17. It says Paul at Athens, right? And this be the 16th verse. Now, while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Because you have to understand, here it is, you have this pious man, the apostle Paul, right? And he's seeing the city full of idols and people, Jake worshiping it. And that stirred his spirit up to where he had to speak and say something, to condemn that, but not be overbearing. This is why the apostle Paul would say certain things and use certain analogies that those Israelite foreigners would understand, because if he came at them hard like he would to the Jews at the time, they wouldn't understand what he was saying and they would just dismiss it. So he had to kind of treat those Israelite foreigners with kid gloves until he can he knew that they were capable of understanding what he was saying. And then he would, get loose if they started doing some dumb shit. It says, therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons and in the market daily with them that met with him. Because the marketplaces back then, which today would be malls, they were outside malls, they were your swap meets, they were your flea markets, so on and so forth, goes back to the Greek word agora, which means market or marketplace, right? So when you scroll down to the agora, it says any assembly, especially of the people, the place of assembly for public debating, for elections, for trials, for buying and selling, for all kinds of business, marketplace, street. And this is where the people would meet to do these things. And that's how life was, in that region of the Mediterranean. It wasn't like, okay, well, we're going to rent this hall out, we're going to rent this synagogue or this hall or this inn or this room, and we're going to have a debate, in there. No, it was done out in the public. It was done out in the public. Okay? So let's read that again in Acts 17 and 17. So it says, therefore disputed he, meaning the apostle Paul, in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, what will this babbler say? Right, because they looked at him strange. But some of them were curious as to what he was saying, because that's all they did was hear and speak about the different, views and opinions and theories of all these different people, and compare it amongst themselves. So the apostle Paul was giving them the true and living way, but some of them scoffed at it. Some he seemed to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he spoke about it. Said because he preached unto them Yahushua and the resurrection, which they were not acquainted with that. So this is some new thing to them. It says, and they took him and brought him unto Areopagus. Now, Areopagus is the word Mars Hill. All right, Mars Hill. Ariel and Pagus. Areopagus is just Mars Hill, saying, may we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We will know, therefore, what these things mean. All right. And let me see. Let's go from there. Let's go to 2 Timothy. I believe it's 2 Timothy. Just bear with me. So, and by the way, you know, today's our camp day, but, you know, it's like about 14 degrees out here. And by the time we go to camp, it's going to be a lot colder. So, you know, we're going to have an indoor camp this week. And it's supposed to warm up next week into the 40s and 50s. So Lord's will be back out there next week, you know. So this is 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And I'll start at 1. I charge you therefore before the Most High and the Lord Yahushua, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Right. Now, if it's too cold or if it's pouring rain and you don't have a place, you know, where you have something that's covering you, of course, you can't go out there and teach. But for the most part, just because it's a little cold, you know, like if it's in the 40s, you know, upper 30s, 40s, you know, 50s, that's out of season, but you could still go out there and teach. You know, but now when you're talking about, you know, the teens and below, you know, you have to be careful with that, you know. It's good to say, be not over righteous. It says, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. And this is the point. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And this is what these people said to the Apostle Paul here in Acts 17:20. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know, therefore, what these things mean. Because if they saw benefit in it, they're going to take some of it and use it in their teachings. And that's, you have a lot of Israelites out here that do that. They'll watch all the different groups, make a garment, make a 12 tribe sign, and then put together what they feel should be, you know, the truth, and discard what some stuff that this group says, discard some stuff that this group says, and add their own shit to it. And that's why Gamaliel said, if this work be a minute, it will come to naught. Because a lot of these guys that are out here, they're not really qualified to be teachers because they didn't come up the right way. You know, they came up some other way. So it goes on to say in Acts 17:21, for all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. You see? So that's what was going on back then. So you have to understand it in order to be able to understand the scriptures. Like as we read with the Apostle Paul, he was always addressing things, you know, that were offered to idols and explaining to them that that's not the right thing to do, that it's off. They're not supposed to be doing that. Right? Let's see. Right, matter of fact, let's read a little more. It says, then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill, which is Areopagus, and said, you men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription to the unknown God. Whom therefore you ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. So he was breaking it down as to who the Most High really is and who his son Yahushua really is. Because they were devoted, but they just didn't have the right direction. So he was giving them direction. So when we go to 1 Corinthians 1:18, it says, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of the Most High. So it all depends on if you're a part of the elect, you know, how you're going to perceive this truth. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Have not the Most High made foolish the wisdom of this world? Right. So why would you want to try to incorporate the wisdom of this world when it's foolishness to the Father? You know, all of this going to these different colleges to learn the Bible. The Lord never said to do that. You know? So it goes on to say, for after that in the wisdom of the Most High, the world by wisdom knew not the Most High, it pleased the Most High by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe, because that's pretty much what that's pretty much the measuring stick. Being out there teaching the word, and those that are part of the elect are going to receive it. It's going to be, it's going to be a lovely song to them. But others, they're not going to hear it. They're not going to want to deal with it. It says, for the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. And we just read about the different philosophers and them meeting, in the marketplaces and talking about all of these different doctrines. And they love when new shit will come up so they can have something to talk about. But we preach Yahushua crucified unto the Jews a stumbling block, because they didn't get it, because they didn't accept the Messiah. And unto the Greeks foolishness, right? Because they're into Apollo, they're into Zeus, they're into Jupiter, they're into, the Titans and all of that Greek mythology that they were into. So they didn't view, what the Apostle Paul was saying as important. To them it was foolishness. That's why I said, what will this babbler say? But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, because they're both Israelites, Yahushua, the power of the Most High and the wisdom of the Most High, because the foolishness of the Most High is wiser than men, and the weakness of the Most High is stronger than men. And this is why, when we jump back up to the 10th verse, the Apostle Paul warned them about, being divided in what they taught, dealing with the gospel, because you had some that were trying to incorporate some of the everyday life of the they were trying to bring in the worship of the idols into what was being taught by the Apostle Paul and the rest of the men that were teaching. That's why with the Corinthians he cursed them out about the men having long hair, because that was a custom that was kept in that region. But in other regions he didn't have to curse them out, because they obviously weren't doing that. But if that applied in one region, of course it's going to apply in all regions. It's just like I believe the Apostle Tahar had spoke on this, where he told the Corinthians not to let the women teach, or not to let the women speak in the churches. That just didn't apply to the Corinthians. That applied to all of the churches of the saints. It wasn't just in one region. And just that if he would have told the Galatians that the men couldn't wear dresses, right? Let's just say for instance, and he didn't say that to the people of Thessalonica, does that mean that the men in Thessalonica, it was okay for them to wear a dress? He was just addressing the ones in Galatia? No, that's stupid. Stupid reasoning. And when you go through the letters of the Apostle Paul said, look, when you read these in the church, make sure you send it to other churches so they could read it also. Because it was meant for all of them, not just one of them. It's just that certain problems he was having in certain churches, especially in Corinth, and that's why he addressed so many things in Corinth. But some of the other places, they weren't doing those things. That's why he didn't have to address that. Otherwise, he would have. So 1 Corinthians 1:10, now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Yahushua HaMashiach, that you all speak the same thing, see? And that there be no divisions among you, right? Because everybody had, matter of fact, let's go to 1 Corinthians right quick. 1 Corinthians 14, just bear with me. 1 Corinthians 14, and I believe it's 26. It says, how is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you hath a psalm, hath a doctrine, hath a tongue, hath a revelation, hath an interpretation. Let all things be done unto edifying, because if you're slopping things all together, it's not going to work. Remember, the scriptures speak about the untempered mortar. You got to have tempered mortar. You have to have the right stuff to build. You have to have the proper bricks and the proper mixture in that mortar to make them all stick together. So he's like, look, you can't be divided. You can't, one guy's teaching about one thing and then you teaching about something else, because it's going to cancel each other out. That's why he also said in the same chapter that the Most High is not the author of confusion. Because you had a lot of individuals out there teaching a lot of different things. That's why the Apostle Paul had to address all these things by letter or face to face. Because I'm sure there's certain stuff that went on there that wasn't even written about. other problems that they had that he might have addressed. But these were some of the more pressing issues. All right. So going back, let me read that again. 1 Corinthians 1 and 10. Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Yahushua, that you all speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment, right? Because if you're divided, everything's going to fall apart. For it has been declared unto me of you, let me see, for it had been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you. Now this I say, that every one of you saith, I am of Paul, and I am of Apollos, and I am of Cephas, and I of Yahushua. Is Yahushua divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? See? So pretty much, he was just getting them up to speed, on the teachings of the gospel and the do's and don'ts. Some stuff they were doing was off. He was correcting them on it. But what you have to understand when reading the scriptures is, why was he addressing these things? Because today, these things, some of these things that they were doing back then, they're not really doing today. Or they're doing something different or in a different fashion. To where if somebody was to write something about what's going on now, in the future, they wouldn't understand it if they didn't know what was going on at the time that this was written. And this is the point of this lesson. Walk through history, life in the Mediterranean region. Because these are the things that were going on. This is why the Apostle Paul said there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek. This is why the Apostle Peter, matter of fact, let's go to 2 Peter 1 and 16. It says, for we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Yahushua, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Why? Because you had some that were teaching these fables about the Messiah. Remember, they took what was being taught and incorporated it into their madness. This is why the apostles had to constantly be on top of them and correct them, because they were going off. The same thing today. When it comes down to correction, and being the defenders of the gospel, great millstone through the spirit and power of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua B'Shem Chakodash are the ones in the forefront. Because you have a lot of madness coming out. And men waxing worse and worse, as was the warning that was given to us even back then, all the way till now. So it had to be addressed. All right. So pretty much those are the main points right there. That you have to understand what was going on at that time to really get into what the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter and them were saying, and the reason why they wrote what they wrote. And the reason why Yahushua was saying what he was saying to them different individuals he was speaking to. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.